You come here unannounced on the day my daughter is to be married.
Wait, is this your best Godfather bit?
No. I trusted you, Nicky. I welcomed you into my home. We broke bread together. Grandmama made you a cannoli.
Who's Nicky? My name's not Nicky. The cannoli was delicious, though.
And how did you repay my generosity? With a rug made from the butt of a skunk. A skunk butt rug. You disrespected me. You disrespected my grandmama, who I buried in that skunk butt rug.
A skunk butt rug. Sounds and smells awful. But I meant no disrespect. I mean, it's a decent Godfather parody. You're doing great.
I told you never to show your face here again, but here you are.
Okay, I'm just gonna go. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan. Hey, welcome to the new year, 2020. That's when this episode is getting recorded, just a few days after the new year. Even though we started the podcast in mid-2019, so the podcast hasn't been around for a year yet. We are ready to continue into 2020 strong with the same quality programming you've enjoyed thus far. Now, it's a little early to start talking about this, but I'm pretty excited, so I wanted to go ahead and leave a little taste. One of the new additions to the podcast this year, probably in the next month or so, coming soon, I'll just say that, coming soon, is more an effort for additional collaboration among the guest hosts and all of you listeners out there. So I'm going to, before I record an episode, ask friends and colleagues how they would use an upcoming film. So the collaborators and I, the guest hosts and I, we chat a month or two out from recording, and we choose a film, and then we get the recording date scheduled, such as this evening, and we put it, we watch it, we put our notes down on a shared Google Doc, we have fun with it, and that's a great collaborative effort. I want to do more. I want to do more than that. So we have the guest host. I'm not going to change that format. We're going to have a colleague come on and talk about their work, their research, their teaching, and choose a specific film that we can talk about with respect to psychology. And this new edition is just going to be additional voices. And most of those voices will probably be text-based. So it'll be me reading those responses out on episodes where we talk about those films. So when I get films going and I have them on the schedule, I'm going to reach out to people and ask them, hey, how would you talk about psychology in this way? I know you may not be on this episode, but man, I really would love to collaborate and contribute to that one. So that's another way that I'm going to incorporate everyone into the podcast as best I can and get more voices, because this is real fun, and a lot of people are listening, a lot of people are enjoying it. I'm getting good feedback here and there. Just keep doing what you're doing. I really, really, really appreciate all of the feedback, the love, etc. So today's episode, not going to be any different from any of the ones that we have done previously. we're going to be talking about Zootopia. Released in 2016, it's a Disney animated jaunt, not Pixar, just Disney, starring Jason Bateman and Jennifer Goodwin as a fox and a rabbit, respectively, in an animal-based utopia called Zootopia, hence, where carnivores and herbivores, or predators and prey, live in harmony. Judy Hopps, the rabbit, becomes the first rabbit to graduate from the police academy. Roles typically filled by larger mammals or predators. On a routine day, she meets a grifter fox, Nick Wilde, played by Bateman. In a well-done role, I think. I think he did pretty well in that. You know, a typical Jason Bateman. There is intrigue, suspense, and animal-based humor, and they all mix really, really well with all of the psychology that we are about to discuss. My guest host today is Dr. Justine Egan-Kunicki. Justine is an assistant professor at the Community College of Rhode Island. She received her Ph.D. From the University of Rhode Island in 2016 in behavioral science psychology with concentrations in both multicultural and peace psychology. That's an interesting one. At CCRI, Justine teaches Gen Psych, social psych, and theories of personality. Justine is passionate about social justice issues, serving on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at CCRI, where she has facilitated workshops related to diversity and implicit bias. In her spare time, Justine loves to binge watch shows on various streaming services, samesies, cook new recipes with her husband, Zach, and going hiking with her dog, Maddie. Justine, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I am glad to have you on. So to get us started on your background that relates to Zootopia, the film, what has your research primarily focused on?
Yeah, so during my doctoral program, my research was really focused on kind of different attitude perceptions as it related specifically to violence and nonviolence. In other words, how people can kind of view the same violent act as more or less severe and looking at that in a more quantitative kind of way. So I've always had interest in issues of kind of social justice kind of a lens. But in addition to my work as a psychologist, I'm also a certified Kingian nonviolence trainer. And so basically that work focuses on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy for social change and conflict resolution. So we do trainings, and really try to kind of instill this philosophy of nonviolence in people. But we focus on things like empathy, perspective taking. So when we're in a conflict with someone, it's really difficult to really think about some of these things, to think about someone else's viewpoint. And so we try to really put that as a focal point. At CCRI, like you said, I'm really working in this kind of space of trying to have these conversations with people at the college about issues like racism, microaggressions, and the like, to kind of just improve our college culture. In my classroom, I dedicate 2 weeks to discussing the concepts of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination in my social psychology classroom, because I think in our current social political kind of climate, these issues are more relevant than they ever were before. And I think having the space to have those conversations is really important. So I feel like in my work outside of the classroom and both in the classroom, I spent a lot of time in this kind of space, just talking about issues of racism and other types of kind of prejudice and discrimination.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of stuff, and it's all really important stuff. When I read the Kingian nonviolence trainer, my interest was really piqued about that, and I think that fits perfectly with Zootopia. So I'm really glad that you chose this film to have us talk about. So let's pivot now from research and teaching focuses to film, as is the nature of the podcast. So my questions to you, as I ask all of my guest hosts, So what do you love about film? Why would you combine film or TV with psych in your teaching? And what do you want your students, other film enthusiasts to know about film in general? I mean, we're going to specifically talk about Zootopia, but film in general.
Okay. So, I mean, I just love that films really provide this kind of window, right, into the human condition. We often may not like look for that in our daily interactions, unless, like us, we're psychologists who study this for our jobs.
Yeah.
But I think films kind of have this beautiful ability to not only entertain us, but to give us knowledge about our social worlds within a certain time period. We look at films from the past, we look at films today, and they provide this kind of insight into that social world for that time period. Even films that maybe are veering into kind of the fantasy lens or things like that are still giving a kind of commentary on the social period of that time. And so I combine film and psych in my teaching because it resonates with my students. They think it's, really useful, and it just, they get it. And at the community college, I have both traditional age kind of college students who are fresh out of high school. Sometimes they're high school students. But I've also had non-traditional students and students who are coming from all different walks of life, veterans, older students. And I get such a kind of mix of students in the classroom. So being able to kind of use entertainment to kind of transcend some of that gap has been really useful to me as an instructor. And my students, I tend to refer to myself as kind of like the example queen in the classroom, because I know because I'm either kind of providing them with examples related to pop culture or film, or asking them to come up with their own, because I do think it's a way to take something that seems really complex and kind of bring it down to earth, really.
Yeah, and it's something that they probably have experience with because they watch movies and they watch TV, so they can join you in your court, so to speak.
Exactly. They feel it's more on their level kind of deal. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I use a lot of different short clips in my courses because, time is always of the essence when we think about curricular demands in a course. But I try to use a lot of short clips and things of that nature. So I was thinking in my notes, but one of my favorites is you had talked about Mean Girls in one of your episodes.
Right.
And one of the clips I like to show is the scene with the young woman who states, I saw Katie Heron wearing army pants and flip-flops, so I bought army pants and flip-flops.
Yeah.
And really is this demonstration of kind of normative influence and thinking about how, we're so under sway of others because we want to be accepted and we want to be liked. And then one of my most favorites, because students laugh so hard every single time I show it, is a clip from The Waterboy. And even though it's an older film, and even though some of them may not even seen the film, the clip still resonates with them. It's the medulla oblongata scene where the professor is like, the medulla oblongata. And Adam Sandler becomes really angry because the professor makes fun of him, essentially. And
it's a really odd scene, and nobody refers to it as the medulla oblongata. So
exactly. But I think it's really this kind of like almost like meta way to like show it in social psych during the aggression chapter, because then you're, it's talking about aggression, even not fully correctly in how it's referred to in this context.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're able to kind of use it as an example. I use an example as a effective aggression and that kind of, really hostile anger-based aggression. But
so excellent. Thank you for talking about all of that. So, Justine, as I mentioned, you decided to have us discuss Zootopia, much to my enjoyment. And so, particularly on this choice, what was your reasoning that you could share?
Yeah, so I decided to have us discuss Zootopia because it kind of really packs a punch, right? In terms of providing a really kind of great discussion of these concepts of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, especially because these are kind of heavy concepts. And so Zootopia is providing a kind of lighter way to kind of segue into a discussion without remaining in such a heavy space. And I think that's important when we're talking about such heavy concepts like these.
And I just kind of want to stop you there for just a second, because I think it's worth saying that it's pretty, I think, historically indicative that Disney and Disney films allow us to have these kinds of conversations. Some of them haven't been great, Dumbo, but recently, I think in the last 30 or 40 years, they've allowed children to approach some of these topics in maybe a less threatening way. And my kids love Zootopia. So they're like, we want to watch the bunny movie. I'm like, okay, great. You can learn how, don't judge a book by its cover. Some people are different, and their differences should be celebrated. And, we could take it in that direction.
Exactly.
And eventually, I think, by way of the Disney movie, that when they get older, they'll see that is a nice allegory for real life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, it not only provides that kind of starting point, but I think also not just, judging a book by its cover, but also just taking a moment to kind of actually understand that if you get to know someone, you'll actually see who they really are and, get that insight into them and how they're different from, kind of what you might have thought of them previously. So taking that kind of time.
Yeah, exactly. So Justine, should we define those three big concepts first for our listeners who might not be familiar with what stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination are and how they are separate from each other?
For sure, because I think they can be difficult to kind of differentiate when you aren't fully, working in this area or this field. But yeah, so we're talking about stereotypes. We're really talking about these generalizations that we make about entire groups of people, which more often than not are completely inaccurate in nature. When we're talking about prejudice, we're referring to negative attitudes or beliefs about entire groups of people. While discrimination really has to do with the negative actions or kind of behaviors we take against entire groups of people. So, prejudice might be, I have a belief, and again, this is a negative belief and it's a stereotype and it's not accurate, but I may have a belief that all Muslims are terrorists. Well, then I may not hire someone who is Muslim because I have this belief. And again, while that is an inaccurate stereotype, it may change my behavior of how I treat someone because of it.
Exactly. And the one major distinction that I tend to make in my classes, because I'll jump through, I'll especially talk about stereotypes in a non-social class, not really prejudice, discrimination. But what I tend to do is focus this on the ABC model, or really what I like to call it, which is the CAB model, because cognitions, affect, then behavior. So as opposed, I know why ABC was chosen, because that's our alphabet, but really it's the CAB, because your thoughts come first, you assign a value judgment to those thoughts, and then you behave based on those attitudes.
Exactly.
So it's the CAB model in my book, and I spend a lot more time focusing on the C part, the cognition, because I am a cognitive psychologist. But it is fun to differentiate all of them and really show where people's delineated examples come from, what their thinking turns into affect, which then turns in, or an attitude, which then turns into the behavior that they end up doing with the assumptions that they've now made, positive or negative. And of course, we're going to focus on the negative aspect. We should say that there are positive stereotypes, and generally speaking, those are positive in name only. And then you can have a positive affect toward a stereotype, which then maybe will make you be nicer to that person. So discrimination on the positive end. But I think for the focus of this discussion, we're going to spend a lot more time, and so does the movie, with the negative aspects of these three, right?
For sure. I would also just quickly add is that when we think about even positive stereotypes, they tend to be really harmful for the groups that are on the receiving end of those stereotypes more often than not. At least
right, which is why I mentioned that they were positive in name only.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I just wanted to reiterate that point and kind of just add to that. And
I think what we're both trying to say is that we shouldn't stereotype
yes.
if we can help it. Now, it is a cognitive bias, and just because you know about it, it doesn't mean you're going to stop doing it. But because you know about it, you can at least try to stop doing it. And we'll come back to the idea of try toward the end of the episode, so stick around. Justine, you had a good way of organizing this discussion, and when I came into our notes, I thought this was a good idea to do it because of how the movie shows us all three. And we'll do a chronological analysis, as you've indicated in our notes stock here, because first we'll get a taste of stereotypes, then we'll get a taste of prejudices at the kind of at the same time, but those extend further into the meat of the movie. And then we'll get a taste of discrimination on quite a few levels. And I have a clip of before we jump into it, I have a clip of what I call the stage play prologue. So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip for you. It tells you exactly what has happened in this land of Zootopia from the minds of children.
Fear. Treachery, bloodlust. Thousands of years ago, these were the forces that ruled our world. A world where prey were scared of predators. And predators had an uncontrollable biological urge to maim and maul and... and death. Back then, the world was divided in two: vicious predator or meek prey. But over time, we evolved and moved beyond our primitive, savage ways. Now, predator and prey live in harmony. And every young mammal has multitudinous opportunities. Yeah.
Okay. So we have Judy. She lives in a herbivorish kind of farm town called Bunny Burrow. Okay. And her goal is to be a police officer, as you heard in the clip. So, Justine, how could we relate that to real life?
Yeah, so, the play dialogue kind of states like they've evolved, right? That they have become so evolved and now anyone can kind of be what they want to be. Predator and prey are not at odds. And so what I found interesting about that was, people talk about how in our society, we're in a post-racial society or racism is dead. I hear that a lot, especially I'm in the Northeast myself. And so I often will hear those discussions from students or from other colleagues and people. And we know from, various research and things of that nature that marginalized groups or groups that are from kind of non-white or lower SES backgrounds begin at different starting points due to historical contexts in our country. When we think about, the institution of slavery, that set up people for years and generations of impoverishment and suffering and, things of that nature. And so this whole idea of, we can be whatever we want to be tends to be an use today. This often we hear, you should lift yourself up by your bootstraps. But it kind of negates the historical context that marginalizes people or, causes harm to people, and that things that might potentially set them back from the time they're born due to no choice of their own, simply of the identity that they are born within, simply because of that. And so, I think it's an interesting parallel that, it starts out in this really positive kind of framework of, oh, well, predator and prey are not at odds and the world is sunshine and rainbows. But we know as the film continues that it isn't actually that. And so it is a nice kind of insight into how some of the arguments that get told and get said in the world today and really aren't necessarily the reality or the real case, I guess.
Yeah, and we can say that the main distinction here that and throughout the whole film is that predator and prey coexist. And it's interesting to point out, and this is the one thing that I thought when I first saw the film and then rewatched it with my kids, is that the predators are the ones who have to make the change for the society. There's very little change from the prey's perspective.
Yeah.
So who is what when we apply it to it is a fun sort of mental gymnastics exercise. If you want to apply the predator prey to real life and who those people might be who have to make the change, we're just going to stick with the prey predator distinction and the prejudice, the stereotype prejudice and discrimination that you get from that. Like,
agreed.
Very, very clear distinction between mammals.
Yep.
Right. I think otherwise we're gonna just tie ourselves into knots, and
totally
it's
fair.
the new year. Let's not tie ourselves into knots. So one of the scenes that you pointed out in this early prologue-y time when Judy is young is her encounter with Gideon the fox. I'm going to go ahead and play the clip of her breaking up Gideon being a bully.
Cut it out, Gideon!
Bah, what are you gonna do, cry?
Hey! You hurt her. Cut it out.
Nice costume, loser. What crazy world are you living in where you think a bunny could be a cop?
Kindly return my friend's tickets.
Come and get 'em. But watch out, 'cause I'm a fox. And like you said in your dumb little stage play, us predators used to eat prey, and that killer instinct's still in our DNA.
I'm pretty much sure it's pronounced DNA.
Don't tell me what I know, Travis.
You don't scare me, Gideon.
You scared now?
Look at her nose twitch. She is scared.
Cry, little baby bunny. Cry, cry. Oh, you don't know when to quit, do you? I want you to remember this moment the next time you think you will ever be anything more than just a stupid carrot-farming dumb bunny.
What about this scene strikes you about our conversation?
Yeah, so, I mean, Gideon Gray, not only is a larger predator in this scenario, but, he physically assaults Judy by slashing her across the face, and he tells her, you're not going to be anything more than a carrot-farming dumb bunny, and he's stereotyping her. He's calling her a dumb bunny. He's treating her horribly. In this case, he literally physically assaults her and discriminating against her because of it. And so he makes this overarching judgment about her being, this weak prey and, brings her down because of it.
Yeah, it's a really tense scene at the very beginning, and he cuts open her face. The first time I saw it, I'm like, oh man, is she gonna have scars when she's older?
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought.
And she's like gonna live with those scars. Luckily, Disney did not put scars on her face. I think that would be a bit unsettling for children.
Oh my gosh.
To have scars on her face, and like her like sadly touching it, remembering that she was assaulted by a predator once.
Yeah, that's too.
But she
that's
uses
emotional.
that as resolve.
I'm
Sorry.
just imagining her like touching her face and being like, "Oh, I'm so sad," and it's too emotional. I can see why Disney didn't do that.
It's a good thing they didn't, right? But Judy uses that moment as a resolve for her wanting to be a police officer, and at this point in the world building, she would be the first police officer who is a small bunny, a small mammal, we'll say, and specifically, a prey. Like there's no fight in a bunny. Why would a bunny ever want to be a police officer? They're not going to carry any weight behind them. And so she's at the training thing, and trainers jumps in and calls her what?
She calls her a bunny bumpkin and a carrot face and a farm girl and all these names throughout the entire scene.
Yeah, awful stuff. I would say that if you try to make the argument that they're trying to be motivating, you watch too much. You watch too many military films. I'll say that.
That's fair.
So Judy succeeds using her not dumb bunny brain, and she graduates from the police academy. But there's an asterisk next to her graduation. And what was that? What was that called, Justine?
The Mammal Inclusion Initiative.
Yeah. What could we relate that to in our world?
Yeah, so we can, represent, it's really representative of affirmative action. So, which people often kind of have a negative connotation towards, but, really is kind of, giving, in this case, Judy a leg up in terms of actually being able to get accepted into the police force and, where she wouldn't have been previously.
Right. And she succeeds, I think, beyond anyone's expectations. I think the mammal inclusion...
She was top of her class, I think.
Right. I think the Mammal Inclusion Initiative was sort of a publicity stunt by a mayor that kind of just doesn't really know what's going on. And I don't think anybody expected Judy to succeed. And so when she did, then, they all then had to figure out what to do. And they didn't do much, as we find out, right? They did not do much.
No.
So they sort of give a little pat on her back and said, good luck, and kicked her out.
Exactly. See you later.
I feel that's... see you later. You're on your own now. Try not to get swallowed up by the big bad city capital. And I think that links well to how even affirmative action is portrayed in news reports and blog posts and all of this kind of, and all of these outlets. When in all reality, it's just trying to give somebody a leg up and to be equitable, as opposed to being dealt with a losing hand. What else happened?
Yeah, so this is kind of a really important scene with her parents. So she's saying goodbye to her parents. It's a cute, tearful goodbye, and they're all nervous because they're nervous for their daughter. Again, as we said, see you later, off to Zootopia, the big scary place. And they talk to her about how foxes are dangerous, and they cite the incident with Gideon Gray, and but she makes a great point at a certain point. She goes, well, he was a jerk who happened to be a fox. I know plenty of bunnies who are jerks. So, her parents were kind of making this generalizing stereotype about all foxes. You need to be afraid of them. And they're scary because they're, in this case, to her parents who are rabbits, they're the out group. I don't know these foxes. Right. I don't trust them. They're scary. They're frightening. No, thank you. And they even give her, you got to take fox repellent. Take a fox taser. And he she's like, I don't need a fox taser. And it's this whole, ridiculous kind of scene, but it's, they're really fearful for her because of these kind of beliefs that, and these generalizations that they've learned throughout their kind of lives about predators. Specifically, in this case, they're contextualizing within foxes, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's really important that she takes the fox repellent.
Yeah.
And on her first day on the job, she has a moment where she is uncertain whether or not she should take it with her. And she does. She even has a little holster for it.
Oh, yeah. She was prepared.
Because there are no guns. There are no guns.
It's true.
But she has this fox repellent on her belt.
That's a good point.
And there's no dialogue with that moment. You have to look at her actions and what is being fueled by her stereotypes and her attitudes toward foxes. And I think she, ultimately makes the choice that drives the story. drives the story, but she makes a clear behavioral decision, just like when a person is, and generally speaking, a woman is walking along a street and finds someone who appears to be menacing. And generally speaking, they're probably not menacing, but they also appear to be a person of color, and that woman will cross the street. I have to say the woman was white in this example. I forgot to say that. And she crosses the street. That's a quick behavioral decision based on the information that she had. And it's the same decision that Judy is making by taking that fox repellent from home to her apartment in Zootopia and to her first.
Yeah. And it's a sense of fear, it's really rooted in this fear of the unknown, fear of something different, fear of something that is outside of the comfort zone. And so,
Right. She does try to make the best of it, but ultimately, it shoots her in the foot. Her rabbit's foot. Not so lucky. Well, one last thing that I want to mention with stereotypes, and I think you had some good examples, real life examples here, is Judy says that not everyone conforms to the stereotype. So what would you say about that?
Oh, would you want me to share my example that I provided here?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So I kind of I like to tell my students, when we talk about stereotypes, if you kind of meet one person who doesn't conform to that, then that stereotype essentially breaks. And what I mean by that is then you can't really use that to apply, because you're going to meet that person, you try to use it, and it may work, it may apply, but it also probably won't. And so in my own experience, I'm 30, so I'm a younger looking professor that is walking into the classroom. And I tend to explain this as an example. Once students actually know me, we're having conversations about this, of the representativeness heuristic, which basically have societally kind of accepted representations of people in certain social roles. So when you tell me about, the word a librarian, I expect a reserved kind of mousy kind of person, maybe. As my students like to tell me when I ask them, well, what do you expect when a professor walks in the door? They go, well, someone who's a lot older than you, typically a white guy. I'm like, okay. And so when I walk in the door, students have to kind of take a second look and go, well, she's walking in the front of the room, so this must be a professor. And I see the same faces every semester where it's like, is she the I have no idea. And one semester, which is the kind of the funny part of the story, is I had a student who literally glared at me because she thought I was a student who was we have computers in all the classrooms, and I was getting set up, and who was using the computer before the professor showed up, and she's glaring at me, and I look at her and I go, hey, and I was being friendly, and I was like, hey, I'm the professor for this course, right? And she goes, and you see her like this look of shock on her face. And she goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I go, it's fine. But the point is that these assumptions, in this case, normally she could be correct. Most professors are older, maybe people, but sometimes you're going to be wrong. And in this case, this student made an incorrect judgment. And, I didn't care. And I thought it was hysterical. And I share that story often with my students, but it's still an assumption that unfortunately that student made, and it led to a false judgment. So.
I thank you for sharing that. I read that and I was like, oh, she has to share that. It's so great. And I don't think you're the only one in our age group, a female professor in our age group that has experienced that or doesn't have a similar story.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it's quite juxtaposed with, how your students express what a professor should look like. And you pivot to me, and they still don't think that I look like a professor. Okay, so Judy is now in Zootopia, and she is, as you said, the precinct chairs aren't made for Judy. They're not made for small mammals. Because what small mammal can do anything with large mammals? Like, what's a bunny gonna do to stop a polar bear or a elephant? You know, it's gonna be quite difficult. Although mouses, what was I watching earlier today? There was something that I was watching earlier today where a mouse makes an elephant freak out. And they do. Mythbusters showed that. I thought that was pretty cool.
That is interesting.
But, you know, bunny. What's a bunny going to do? So the world isn't built for Judy. Policing isn't built for small mammals. Okay. And so, you know, there are issues to be found. She's immediately made a meter maid. She's not assigned to any real police work. She's just made a meter maid because the chief does not want her there and wants to make an unbearable situation, so she'll quit.
Exactly.
And so there are a few psych concepts at play here. So what's the first psych concept about her being a meter maid?
Yeah, so Judy's really experiencing this kind of stereotype threat. She's, worried about conforming to this stereotype. She's a dumb bumpkin bunny from a podunk kind of town. And so she's kind of overcompensate by, I'm going to, get 200 tickets. And, she goes everywhere and goes crazy about it. And she wants to make everyone know she is not a token bunny. And she strives to be the best despite that, but it's this overcompensation because she's so, she's upset that she's a meter maid.
Yeah. She and rightly so. I don't think it's fair at all for her to have been given that. And then later in the film, Nick the fox, who is voiced by Jason Bateman again, he points out to the chief, like, you guys have been working on this case for 2 weeks. And you gave Judy here 48 hours to figure it out. I mean, what the hell? We still have 10 hours. She's not fired.
Exactly.
And so that, the chase continues at that point. But Nick brings up a very good point about how unfairly and unjustly that she's being treated in this new role when she should just be treated as a rookie like any other rookie.
Exactly. She was given none of the resources. He points that out, too, where she's literally doesn't have access to the system or any other resources of having a partner, a real partner or anything like that. And so he's like, you're not helping her here. So she still has this time. You need to give it to her kind of deal.
Yeah. And then they solve the case. Hey, spoiler alert from a Disney movie. They solve the case and everyone lives happily ever after. Yeah. As if you weren't going to get that from a Disney movie. But then I think when we meet Nick is a great callback to American history and discrimination. Do you want to describe that? I'll go ahead and play the scene.
Okay.
Listen, I don't know what you're doing skulking around during daylight hours, but I don't want any trouble in here. So hit the road.
I'm not looking for any trouble either, sir. I simply want to buy a jumbo pop for my little boy. You want the red or the blue, pal?
Oh, come on, kid, back up. Listen, buddy, what? There aren't any Fox ice cream joints in your part of town?
No, there are. It's just... my boy, this goofy little stinker, he loves all things elephant, wants to be one when he grows up. Is that adorable? Oh. Who the heck am I to crush his little dreams, huh? Right?
Look, you probably can't read, Fox, but the sign says, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. So beat it.
You're holding up the line.
Hello? Excuse me.
Hey, you're gonna have to wait your turn like everyone else, meter maid.
Actually, I'm an officer. Just had a quick question.
So, Justine, what American history event can we relate to some of the stuff that happened in the ice cream bar?
Yeah, so I thought back to, when we think about kind of the 60s and kind of old kind of just kind of ideas of discrimination, of this kind of overt kind of discrimination of you're not welcome here. And he says to him, you know, aren't there any Fox ice cream stores? You don't belong here kind of language. And, you know, African Americans heard that type of language in the 60s at lunch counters and in other public accommodation kind of spaces where, you know, there was segregation and they weren't allowed in certain spaces. You know, luckily people fought for those rights and that, you know, segregation, I mean, that's a whole different thing. But yes, you know, we're not to the same level of overt segregation as we are, you know, we've been in the past, I would say. You know, there's still segregation, but besides
Yeah, and I go back to what I said about Disney movies giving a little bit of a waiting pool show of it, which is the idea that you can show these things to kids, and then when they get older, they'll see those images from Selma or wherever down in the South and you know, in the 1960s. And they'll see the parallels, or well, you hope that they'll find those parallels there, because it was done really well. And then Judy comes in and is like, you know, I'm gonna stop you there. You know, us small mammals got to stick together, kind of thing. And then she realizes that it's all a con, and you know, thinks that Nick isn't the greatest character, and that gets her into trouble.
Yeah. And she, I mean, that being said, I think when she first meets him, you know, she goes into it with this really positive kind of feelings towards him. And he kind of, you know, kind of lifts the veil and she's like, oh no, like he's actually this con artist who's, you know, scamming me this whole time. So I think it did change her perception of him and how, you know, that this viewing him as a con artist maybe changed some of that too. But
I agree with that. So before we move on to Judy returning to Bunnyborough after a failure, there is a historical psychological argument to be found in some of the dialogue. This idea about biology, I think, runs deeply through a lot of the psychology of the 20th century, and it has perpetuated a lot of the prejudice and discrimination. So what could you say about that?
Yeah, so I mean, they, you know, use this biology argument, and that's been an argument, as you pointed out, that's been used to kind of perpetuate specifically a lot of times racist ideology. So as it related to specifically African American or Black Americans in American history, of, you know, viewing them as different, as less intelligent, or you know, as vicious or scary in some way. And these biological arguments, you know, have been used to kind of distinguish these racial groups and see them as different in some way, and that we're different because of our biology. But, you know, we know that race is this socially constructed concept that, you know, these were categories that were, you know, arbitrarily created many years ago. When we look at the census, I mean, you know, originally the categories, we had like 3 categories, and then we transitioned to these larger where people could actually self-identify, and, you know, and so these were really socially constructed, and that these categories really have no semblance of, you know, real meaning in terms of genetic difference and, you know, that kind of thing. And so it was really used to retain power, specifically by, you know, individuals who had power, specifically white individuals in American history, to hold on to their power and say, okay, well, if I categorize you as such, I can, you know, give you less, you know, rights and less, you know, opportunity because of that. So,
and you could also link it to some of the stuff that I talk about in history of psych, where Goddard at the beginning of the 20th had IQ tests for incoming European immigrants, and those folks were white, but a lot of them were also Jewish. And the idea among Goddard, who was you know, he was an influential psychologist at the time, but he was also a eugenicist, and he didn't like Judaism, and he thought the Jews that were coming from Europe were less than, and so he wanted to use IQ tests to show that in order to reduce their rights, put them into groups that were known to be not given opportunities. So if they were characterized as an imbecile or something like that, they wouldn't get employment places. And so luckily that was dismantled fairly quickly, but there was that he still had his impact on immigration at a turn of the 20th century. And I think that fits there with this whole biological Judaism's a religion. So, there's no reason why their biology would be any different from any American who was living in America at the time. So I think that fits with that. And I really, my students are floored when I talk about Goddard in that way, because if they've even heard of him, it's only been in the positive light, and really it's not positive at all. So moving along to, so let's jump through. Judy goes back to Bunnyburrow because she feels like she failed, because she can't find Emmett Otterton, and they can't find out who did what to whom to make the predators become savage and aggressive, etc. And she ends up running into Gideon Gray, and he's a farmer now, and he provides the hops. I think now that I say that, he provides the hops. He provides the family hops with produce for their highway store, I guess, for their produce store. And Gideon says hi to him, and he apologizes to Judy about what he did when he was a kid, and says his behavior isn't indicative of his life now, right? He says, I am a reformed predator, I suppose would be a good word. Reformed predator.
I also like that Judy's parents talk about how she opened their minds as well. So when she sees Gideon Gray, she's like, they're really surprised, or she's really surprised that he's working. It's like, Gideon Gray. And they're like, Judy, you opened our minds. Like, we should give foxes a chance, and we should give people a chance. And so I thought that was really cool that Judy in this case was kind of a facilitator of that change in her own family, which was cool.
It's nice. It's a bit of secondary heartwarming going on.
Yeah, I think it's a comfort. I always talk about comfort levels in a lot of the diversity workshops I lead, is because when we think about some of these assumptions that we make, or these kind of quick thinking kind of behaviors we engage in, they're really coming from this place of discomfort, right? And so, just to the point of the example you just, said is, that was a sense of discomfort, of unknown, of, I don't know what that looks like. And then once you kind of are faced with it and you actually are in it, then you kind of become more comfortable, and you realize you're like, oh, okay. I just didn't know what this situation looked like or what that meant. And now I understand. And now I realize I was just kind of overthinking it almost. And so I think a lot of times in these, types of situations that seem really kind of uncomfortable or, difficult to deal with, what we do a lot of times I find is we withdraw. In my experience, with talking with people about these things, is we withdraw, or we try to, we run away in some sort of way because we're afraid. And so I always tell people, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to engage in those conversations, get to know people different than yourselves, because you're not going to actually get out of your comfort zone unless you do that.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that brings us to a great segue about the last point that I think both of us wanted to make, which is Judy's final words to the audience. And then we find out later that she's actually giving a speech to the new graduating class of the police academy. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that final clip for. All right, Justine. So no worries. This scene, I guess the words, the dialogue that is used, piqued your interest. So, what can we say about this to wrap up?
Yeah, so I really love this ending point about how change starts with all of us and that we simply have to try. I think when we are.
See, I said we were going to come back to try.
You did. And I think, it's about making an effort. It's about taking a second to not make those assumptions, to try to, really assess the situation, to get to know the person. If it's someone that you don't know from a background you're unfamiliar with, or from, an area of the world you're not familiar with, or whatever, get to know them. And, rather than withdrawing, like I said before, rather than withdrawing, stepping forward and actually getting to know that person in a way that's really authentic and meaningful. And, I think we don't do enough of that in our society. And I think a lot of us are working on trying, but we have to keep encouraging people to try.
Try. Don't listen to Yoda at this point. You definitely can try. The representativeness heuristic for stereotyping, etc., all the cognitive biases associated with stereotyping, with prejudice, all of that, just knowing the biases is not going to shut them off. You actually have to work on it. You have to understand and be a little bit introspective sometimes and be like, why did I make that thought? Or why did I do that thing? Or why did I crinkle my nose in disgust, etc.? You gotta actually have some inward attention sometimes. And, a lot of people just say, try. Just try. I think that is going to do it for our discussion of Zootopia. Hey, listener, before we go, just want to make sure that you are liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast. I would really, really love it if you did. Justine would love it if you did. Thank you to all of you who are sharing on social media. I can't see all the shares, but like I said at the top of the show, I know they're happening because I'm getting feedback here and there. And if you have the opportunity and the ability, please take a look at our Patreon. More work is going to be done on that this 2020 calendar year, so stay tuned for some of those additions. And if you can spare something through that or PayPal to keep the podcast going, we would definitely appreciate that. Thanks to Dr. Justine Egan-Kunicki for joining me to discuss Zootopia. While saying goodbye, Justine, is there anything that you would like to plug?
No, but, feel free to link them to my departmental page. And thanks for having me. This was awesome.
You bet. And I will definitely link them to your departmental page as I do for as many people as I can. So until the next episode, thanks for listening.